Welcome everybody to B Corp 101. What does it mean to be a B? First, just so you all know, since this is a breakout session, it is being recorded, and by turning your camera and microphone on, you're giving permission to be recorded. If you'd rather not, of course, feel free to turn your video off, but we do love to engage. Quick intro to the session. I am Michelle. I had the pleasure of working at Tony's Chocolonely, another B Corp, and just super passionate about this community, really enjoy interacting with folks, and so really excited for this session in particular because Craig is very knowledgeable and amazing about the B Corp community, and he's going to tell us all, oh gosh, more people coming in. Sorry, don't want to leave anyone out. Multitasking, like they tell you not to do. All right, I will continue. For those of you who've just joined us as we speak, welcome. Feel free to adjust your name, let us know who you are, so we can all engage. And we are talking about B Corps. What does it mean to be a B? The B Corp community is super special. I'm stoked to introduce you to Craig Hill, who is a VP at Beneficial State Bank, and he's going to inspire us all about what it means to be a B. He'll guide us through the process, the assessment, the community, and so much more. He's got over 10 years working in the B Corp space and currently serves as the certifications chair for nonprofit B Local PDX. So this guy is experienced, knows his stuff, and perfectly suited to fill us in on all these important details. He's going to start off with an overview, basically, and then open it up for some interactive Q&A at the end. But of course, feel free to ask questions as we go. You can use the chat if you prefer. I can help compile that and keep an eye on it and make sure Craig addresses all the key themes. And also, you can raise your hand, or you can even just speak up. We're at the moment about 30 people in here, so it shouldn't be too crazy. And yeah, would love to see your faces if you want. And if you have noisy background, please be on mute, but otherwise I think we'll be okay. And I'm going to hand it over now to Craig to take us away.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Excited to be here with y'all today. Just brief intro about myself. Again, my name is Craig Hill. I use he, him pronouns with Beneficial State Bank, a B Corp here in Portland. But I've also been on the certifications chair for B Local PDX here in Portland for the past 4 years. And the first project that I got hired to work on at Beneficial State Bank when I was an administrative assistant and temp over 9 years ago was doing data collection and research for our initial B Corp certification, which was actually at that time version 2 of the B Impact Assessment. We're now on version 6 of the BIA. We're about halfway through that version, which just shows you how many times it's been revised over the past 9 years. And version 7 should be at some point in 2021. Maybe a little bit delayed, like everything due to COVID. A little bit about myself. I've actually been on parental leave for the past 8 weeks. My wife and I had a baby, and it's my turn at home, and I've been delighted about it. It also feels weird to shower and be on the video during the day. One of my favorite things to do in life is have a shower, and I shower every day, and I have probably showered half of the days of my leave. So that is the thing that changes about having a child, in case you're wondering. Yeah, and I'm just really thrilled to be here today and tell you all a little bit more about what it means to be a B Corp, how you get certified. Most of you have at least passing familiarity, I'm sure, with what the B Corp community is. And I'm happy to go as deep or as broad or as, surface level, 30,000 feet, whatever works for everybody. Michelle's going to be fielding questions, so please be generous with those. If there's something that I feel like I'll touch on a little bit later, I'll make sure I won't feel interrupted if you put something in the chat at any given time. We'll get there. My email address is also the coolest email address in the history of the planet. I'm chill@beneficialstate.com. So you can always shoot me an email after this is done. I'd be happy to buy you a virtual coffee or something and talk more about becoming a B Corp and how it might work for your company or you or a friend's company about why becoming a B Corp is the right move for just about everyone. So with that, welcome. Becoming a B Corp in and of itself, it's important to recognize that a B Corp and a benefit corporation are two different things. Miriam, who was generous enough to draw us a square in one of the previous sessions over here, squares are one of my favorite analogies, where it's like all rectangles are squares, or all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. All B Corps are benefit corporations, but not all benefit corporations are B Corps. Benefit corporation is a state level filing. So much like when you incorporate as an LLC or a C Corp or an S Corp or a sole proprietorship, when you file your organizational documents at the state level, you file as a benefit corporation. You could do that in Oregon as an LLC or as a corporation. We're one of 2 states that actually allows LLCs to be benefit corporations. So it makes it pretty low-hanging fruit for that side. I don't want to get too far into the legal weeds of what it means to be a benefit corporation. But at the same time, all it really requires is that you have a third party say that you do something for 3 bottom lines of a company. And that could be paying $50 a year to Green America, which is kind of the absolute entry level basis point, or it could be kind of the platinum standard of becoming a B Corp. B Corps, on the other hand, are required now when you recertify, or if you're a new company going through, if your state offers benefit corporation legislation for your corporation type, you must incorporate as a benefit corporation. But the B Corp certification itself, that's just one leg of it, is becoming a benefit corporation. It's actually a transparent third-party set of metrics designed to measure, analyze, and provide suggestions for growth for companies to measure things across all the bottom lines of their company, not just profit. As somebody who works at a bank, I've seen a lot of financial statements and helped a lot of people chart their way through profit and loss. We all have shared numbers when it comes to, when you give somebody a profit and loss statement, they mean the same thing in Japan as they mean in Portland. They mean the same thing as they do in Europe as they do in the United States. A profit and loss statement is going to look pretty darn similar. We don't have shared metrics for what does it mean to work for a company that provides excellent healthcare? What does it mean to be a company that is LGBT inclusive? What does it mean to be a company? What is your company doing across its bottom lines for thinking about carbon emissions, or thinking about how much of its energy it uses is renewable and from non-carbon based sources or combustion based sources? The B Corp, the B Impact Assessment at the heart of the B Corp certification tries to put metrics to each of those bottom lines. And it has been inartful at times, but it is a process of constant improvement, that kind of Kaizen idea of constantly getting a little bit better all the time. That applies both to the assessment itself and to your company taking the assessment. One of the cool things about the assessment, though, is that it is as broad and as deep as you could ever want to go. And there are no questions on the assessment that disqualify any company from becoming a B Corp for not answering affirmative to them, other than if you are a gun manufacturer or a private prison. Those are the only 2 industries that are currently not allowed to be B corporations. I've had some really interesting thought exercises about every type of industry, who should be banned. There's some people argue that sex work. There's some other people about alcohol. There's other people who talk about cigarette manufacturers and other pieces. And in theory, they haven't said no, but the only hard and fast ones right now are private prisons and weapons manufacturing. But what that means at that point is that, how do you start measuring these things? Well, you ask a lot of questions. So the B Impact Assessment at the heart of the B Corp certification is, to become a B Corp, you must score at least 80 points out of a possible 200 on the B Impact Assessment. It's available on the B Lab website. B Lab, I should go back a little bit, B Lab is a nonprofit who is not affiliated with B Local PDX. That's where Dr. Alonda Williams works. B Lab is the arbiter, decider of all things the B Impact score. They are the maintainer of the assessment. They are the ones who are eventually will audit your company when you submit your score for your B Corp score. They are critically not the ones who facilitate a lot of your taking of the assessment, rather than just kind of calling balls and strikes. So when you get down to taking the impact assessment, people are saying, well, how do I get started? Well, you can get started at any time because it's free. There's absolutely no cost whatsoever to taking the B Impact Assessment, and there's no barrier to entry other than creating an account. Creating an account for that is just basically, it needs an email address so you can log out and log back in and pick up where you left off in the assessment. Because the assessment's out of 200 points, depending on your industry type, about 80% of the questions are exactly the same across all companies, and another 20% or so change based on what type of industry you're in. If you work at a marketing company, your supply chain looks a lot different than if you're a furniture company. So the questions are just tailored a little bit to make sure that the assessment's actually drilling into an area where you're going to be able to answer some questions. But critically, people think of they going through the assessment and they start saying, well, cool, I'm ready to go. I want to take this thing. I want to become a B Corp. Let's do it. Well, that's a great start. It's a great attitude. And there's some great metrics on there on the website that says 99% of people will answer the of people and skip a question will keep going. And then it's 79% of people after skipping 2 questions will answer another question. After skipping 3 questions, it's like 5% of people keep going. The important thing to remember when you're taking this assessment is you will not have all the answers the minute you start taking the test. You just won't. It is an exceedingly broad assessment that measures finance, it measures HR, it measures supply chain, it measures ownership, it measures governance. And those are things that are in your environmental impact. So you're going to have your facilities people in there if you're at a company of more than one. And it's okay. Because all you need to get certified on it, we say all, is 80 points out of the 200 that are available. That may sound like nothing, like 80, like, I mean, if you're going in my head, like thinking grades, that's 40%, right? That's not even a D. I could totally do this. The median score of certified companies who've been certified is 84 points. It is right after that hurdle. And part of that reason is it is not a low bar. This is a pretty difficult bar to get over if you're not intentionally making some changes to your company to try to get to 80 points. The median score of companies that take and complete the assessment is about 50 points. So that's not to say companies that have been certified. It's important to just think and say the median score of companies that finish the assessment is about 50 points, meaning they're a little over halfway to the points they need. And it also means they're going to have to make some changes to get there. The various areas of the assessment then start to weave together to creating a tableau that's really your score in general. As you go through it, don't get burdened down by the idea of what you don't know, but rather start categorizing the assessment into various areas. This is how I always recommend to think of a strategy like a stoplight strategy. When you get to the end, after you skip all the questions, you could always come back and fill them in later. You can create a login and then share that login and create separate sub-users in that login to have 20 different people working on the assessment at any given time. So if you go through it and think, oh my gosh, Cheryl is perfect for this, Cheryl is our CFO, she's going to be nails, I'm going to need her help with this, then great, you can say, Cheryl, let's create a login for you and you can make changes to the finance section. But as you go through the assessment and you get to the end, which usually taking an initial first gasp at going through this, it's going to take you at least 60 minutes, if not like 90 or so, just to go through it kind of speed run to see what it all looks like, filling things out. And start identifying that with the stoplight method, as I call it, where basically what over here is total red light, like no way, no how, we're not going to get those points. There's just no way we can do this theoretically like at all in the next 6 months. I just can't even envision us doing it in the next 18 months. That's okay. Because again, you only need 80 points out of 200 to get certified. So it's okay to have 100 points that you just say, I can't even come close on any of these right now. The second category I put them in is the green light things. What did you go through to say to yourself, well, I don't do that, but maybe I could or should. That doesn't seem like a horrible barrier. What would it look like for us to do that? This is something we could put together. Then those are the ones you kind of categorize on that side of, we could do this work. Most of the time, companies that have the points they already have in the green category is not enough to get to 80 points. So that leaves that kind of yellow light idea of, do I accelerate to make it through this light or do I slow down and kind of take it piece by piece? Why I say the yellow light category is the most important is that a B Corp certification lasts for 3 years. So when you certify as a company and B Lab audits your score, you have 3 years from the date of that certification before a recertification occurs. The yellow categories are the perfect ones to think about and think critically for forecasting for your company over the year or the next year as you're making benchmarks of, I really want to hit this profitability margin. Well, that's one bottom line that you're measuring. Could you start putting goals in for, I really want to offer this percentage of healthcare to my employees, or I really want to use this much renewable energy in my energy supply, or I really want to offer LGBT inclusive healthcare packages, or you start thinking through these various ideas of what you could do. Those could be aspirational, which is totally great. And I saw a question come in here about this. A company of one can absolutely get certified as a B Corp, provided that a sole proprietorship cannot certify. But if you're a company of one that's an LLC, or a C Corp, or an S Corp, you could absolutely become a B Corp. Why that's important? it will seem exceedingly unfair to you at times as a company of one how difficult some of these questions are and how broad, like deep they're wanting you to go or asking you about things that you've never even thought about yet or don't have the time to or afforded to. I like to say it's equally unfair to everyone though, because while you could say that that's unfair, Patagonia is going to think some of the things that you got really easily are super unfair because you're one person and can just make a change whenever you want to make a change, write it down and change. A company of 10,000 employees can't do that. So as you're going through the assessment, think about some of these questions may feel unfair to you, but then also recognize that this assessment's being offered to 10,000 employee companies the same way it's offered to a single sole proprietor. So in that way, don't get hung up again on the points that you're not getting and focus instead on this idea. This is not an attrition from 200. This is a march forward from 0. You could be a perfectly legally operating company in this country that is well respected and well regarded and has 0 points on your B impact assessment. Instead, focus on the idea of how are we going to get better? What do we do better than we're required to do as a baseline? This country doesn't really require you to do anything as a corporation other than return a profit to your shareholders. That's it. What benchmark are you going to set for your company to start rewarding your stakeholders beyond just your shareholders? So as you go through that general assessment, it will take time. And I usually say, if you're thinking you're going to go through this in 60 minutes, 6 hours, 6 days, 6 weeks, like you're probably going to be disappointed because this is meant to be something that's going to be a long-term process of working through. The quickest I see folks get through it is around 6 to 8 weeks. It's something that during COVID, some people have some different time on their hands. Where maybe they're not working on some of the projects that they used to be able to work on. Maybe they have a little more bandwidth on their team to focus on some projects over Teams or Slack, and this is something they pick up. That's not always the case for everyone. I would say realistically, giving yourself 3 to 6 months is a good time. And then thinking through that process more holistically of like, all right, we want to get there. The last thing I'm going to focus on before I kind of jump back into some questions on this side is to say, this is not a process that you should think about a destination being just 80 points. It's certainly an important, pit stop in the journey, but it is not the end all be all, because you will have to recertify 3 years after your initial certification. That means that if there's some points that you really want to get and you're at 92 points and you're like, no, but I really want to get to 100. 100 sounds really cool. Stop. This is not about, it's kind of like an SAT score. It's really important for getting into college, but if you talk about it a bunch once you're there, you're kind of a jackass. So I think it's important to just think of that to yourself to say, I really need to get to 80 points as a company to initially certify. And if I want those other points, then I could start planning for those, even if it's not about my certification today, it could be part of my certification a few years from now. With that, just a brief word on the certification piece, the nicest thing about this is you absolutely have to, as part of being a B Corp, be audited by B Lab. So instead of just throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks and feeling like, oh, hey, I can do this, and yeah, nobody's going to check it, they require you to submit documentation that show that you do everything you said you did, which this is where the consumer and employee trust element comes into the B Corp certification. That if it weren't anything that was actually required or rigorously audited, then the entire certification starts to lose relevance. And I think that that's where the power and the trust can come in as an element. As me as a consumer, when I go to the grocery store and I'm picking between 2 packaging, a lot of the time it comes down to good marketing, right? You're looking at something to just say, this is marketed to me better. They could say sustainability, they could say organic, they could say all these other terms that might mean something, or they could be a bit greenwashed. And the B Corp certification is a really nice way to kind of pierce through some of the greenwashing in a lot of ways, because at least there's some metrics that are transparent enough that you can go research the score of that company on B Lab's website. You could dive deeper into those assessment pieces. And a lot of companies release impact reports. So it gives you that kind of ability as a prospective employee of a company who's a B Corp, as a consumer who's purchasing a product, a little bit more of a sight line into that company's behavior and ethics. Out of that, what I would say on this other side is that I gave a TED talk on this last year, and I'm really big on this idea of employees who want to work for companies that do the right thing. Boomers basically say only 21% of polled boomers in 2015 said that the values of the companies that they work for actually mattered to them, and Gen X said it was about 30. 40%. And so Gen Z is now starting to enter the workforce as well, and they're up at the top end of even beyond where millennials are. And over the past 3 years, every single age demographic has cared more about the values of the company they work for than they did 3 years prior. Millennials now make up over 40% of the workforce as well. So as a company is thinking about, that's a plurality. No other age demographic has as many employees in it. So if you're a company thinking critically around what the right thing to do is, maybe that's the right way to do it, is to think about what would my employees want. They want some transparency and they want some visibility. In that regard, your certification is 3 years long. And that means from the date of your certification, there is a fee associated with it at that time, and it's based on the revenue of your company. But once you get certified, basically it's an end user licensing agreement to use the B Corp logo on your packaging. They give you some brand guidelines of what you need to do, and they kind of cut you loose and just say, congrats, you made it. And it's up to you. Your mileage is going to vary on what it means to be a B Corp. It's about joining a community. It's about marketing it to your employees, your stakeholders, your consumers. And in Portland is a particularly rich place to be able to do that. We have a more dense B Corp population than any other city in the country. We have over 100 B Corps in Portland and over 135 in Oregon. And there's about 3,500 certified companies internationally. So if you think about that as a percentage, Portland has a not insignificant percentage of the international B Corps headquartered here. In addition to that, we also have Athleta, Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, a lot of the national B Corps well represented here as well.
Hey, Craig, I don't know if you've seen in the chat, but people are asking some questions around B Lab versus B Corp. So I think maybe just explain B Lab certifies B Corps, and then are there other agencies? Vic kindly provided one, but any other agencies that help people go through the process?
Yes. So B Lab itself is a nonprofit. They can't be a B Corp because you have to be a for-profit company to be a B Corp. There are several PhDs in philosophy who work for B Lab. They are the ones who come up with these questions, and they have literally found their dream job. You ever want to interview them about what it means? I think there's actually a breakout session that talks about how they have created their JEDI metrics and other things later in Build. Pretty cool. And how they are constantly committed to doing better. As far as help on this certification goes, yes, most of the time people who are trying to just soldier through this by themselves are going to have a hard time. It's a lot of questions and it's a lot of bandwidth. It kind of depends on what your needs are as a company and how broad they are, how complicated your company is, and how much you're willing to spend. As a lot of the time, your mileage may vary with some free sources versus paid resources. Here in Portland, I can't recommend highly enough if you're thinking about, I just need some bandwidth. I know what I want to do. I've gone through the assessment, but I need some bandwidth. Portland State University's MBA program has what they call B Impact PSU. It's a cohort. It lasts about 10 weeks, and it pairs between 2 and 6 MBA students with a company that has taken the B Impact assessment and helps them chart their way through their position of where they are today over the next 10 weeks to where they're trying to get to, which is a certification or recertification. It's pro bono. They do have a donation option at the end, but at the same time, it's pairing MBA students who are candidates for an MBA over the next couple of years. They're looking for companies like yours that they want to work for, and giving an opportunity to see behind the screen, all your bottom lines and how to build a business plan, how to build procurement policies, et cetera. I will absolutely share some of the resources with y'all in the chat when this is all over as well. There are some paid resources as well. My colleague, Mike Mercer on the B Local board works and runs a company, M. Mercer Consulting. He has helped over a dozen companies get certified as B Corps, both in Portland and beyond, as well as Kel Moody, who's one of our co-chairs for BLD PNW. Kel works for Cultivating Capital, and they're another group that helps people with strategies to get certified or recertified as well. They're both paid resources, and they will often tailor their offerings to a company of your size depending on what your needs are. Sometimes that's just somebody to have an accountability consultant. Somebody will talk to you for an hour a week until you're done and that you could bounce a lot of questions off of. Sometimes it's like, I need you to come in here and help me figure out how to restructure these to make sure they fit the metrics that I want to build. And obviously the cost of that's going to scale depending on how involved they are. But most of the time the consultants cost less than the actual cost of certification, and the certification cost is based off of your revenue, like I said. And if you're thinking about this as a why where am I going to build the value out of this for the cost, especially during a time during COVID when a lot of company revenue's down. I often encourage people to not think about becoming a B Corp for one reason. Try to think about a multitude of reasons why it's the right idea. Because it's measuring, it's a marketing tool, unquestionably it's a marketing tool, and that's a great way to market that, and you can think of yourselves. It's also an HR tool and a recruiting tool to tell your employees and your over here that we're a better place to work than a lot of places are, and here's why. It's also a way for you to feel to not just be a more sustainable business or a more responsible business, to be a better business, period. I think that those things make you more resilient. If your employees want to work for you, if your customers want to buy from you, you're therefore going to be more resilient than your competitors who they're not connected to. I think that that's just an important thing to recognize as we're thinking about rebuilding, that the companies who have built around values are those that are going to be more successful in the long run. I would definitely say as well, there's only one requirement for becoming a B Corp in terms, and that's other than being for-profit, is that you have to have been in business. You could become a pending B Corp. From the minute you create a company, you can become a pending B Corp, which basically is like a backdoor, and you take the full assessment. You pay a $500 fee for a 1-year pending certification. Oh, sorry, you have to be in business for 1 year. I see I cut out for a second. You have 1 year, 365 days from the date you incorporated. However, if on day one you take the assessment for your company and say, hey, I nailed it, I'm here, you could be a pending B Corp, pay a $500 fee, and after 1 year is over, they look at your assessment again, they give you the opportunity to update it, and then you could certify from that point forward, which still allows you to use the B Corp logo just with a pending next to it. So that way it's that, you just have to be a for-profit company in business for 1 year to be a fully certified B Corp, but you could create a company today and certify on Friday as a pending B Corp, and use the same logo as everybody else, just with a pending on top of that.
And Craig, I have some private messages here as well.
Yeah.
If people are not sure how to answer all the questions and they're contacting B Lab for responses, is that the proper channel to go through, or where could they get some support if they're not hearing back necessarily from B Lab?
It's a proper channel to use if you want to be disappointed. I think that it's their job is really creating the assessment and trying to put the standards out there. They are really overwhelmed with the amount of interest, because while there's 3,500 certified B Corps out there, they've also created this kind of lagging effect where that means every year a third of those are recertifying. And over 75,000 companies have started taking the assessment in the past 12 months. So while they have 3,500 certified B Corps, there's 70 creating an absolute workload for them. So I would say out of that side is start looking local for what resources are out there. We at Be Local offer a hackathon that we try to do every quarter, which is basically a resource where we call together those paid and free resources into, recently it was in a Zoom room because we couldn't do it in a real room anymore. And they bring those together. We try to put them in separate breakout rooms by company. And then when you have questions for a consultant, you come back to the main room and you ask some questions. It gives you a chance to kind of try before you buy with some of the consultants, see what type of resource you might really be needing, what type of personality might work well with your company. And those hackathons are free. I imagine we'll have another one in December, would be on the calendar-wise where it would make sense to do that. And they could work for both initial certifications and recertifications. But B Lab it's really tough because they're the ones who call balls and strikes at the end of the day, but they're not the ones who really help you answer those questions. Now, if you go to submit and you have 80 points and they, for some reason, say, hey, 8 of those points you put down, you don't actually qualify for, they will give you a here's why and a remedy method for any points that have come through. So you're not going to the end of the line and like having to push submit again and start over. A lot of the time they'll give you like 4 weeks to make some changes and come back to the same certification person, the certifications analyst at B Lab, to help you back through the process. But if you have specific questions about what it is, a lot of the time, ask yourself if this seems really complicated or really difficult, are these points you absolutely need to get certified? A lot of the time when something gets really in the weeds and you're not sure how it could apply to you and you're just not quite sure, certainly asking a consultant's one way to go. Another way to say is this in that if I have 50 points and I need 30 more, that means there's 150 potential points out there and I just need 30 of them. So ask yourself if that question you really have a hard time with and it's really hanging you up is the one you really need to answer to get to 80 points. And just kind of one framing thing I tell folks as well is that most of the points are not a binary yes, no. You can see I froze for a second. There we go. Most of the points are not a binary. They're a gradient. So basically they ask you, do you have a carbon reduction strategy for your company? Yes, no. And if you say no, then you don't get any points. You kind of skip to the next question. If you say yes, it's like, have you had it implemented for an entire calendar year? Yes, no. If so, like, did you hit your metrics that you set up for yourself? What were your reduction goals? It's those kind of questions, and each jump along the way will give you a share of the total points for that question. So I wouldn't really worry too much about a level of when you're going through something. If something's really complicated, it's really breaking your brain on it, there's certainly consultants that are available to help you with those things. But I'd also say to yourself, before you pull the lever to like enter the room with those folks and say, I want to pay to have somebody tell me what it is, to be sure that those are points you really need. Otherwise, it could be something that you say to yourself, oh, I paid somebody to tell me that I shouldn't do that, which some folks feel kind of discouraged by.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll definitely connect with you after, Craig, to like compile some of these resources so we can share it out because a lot of people are interested in that.
Most definitely.
Let's see some other questions. Do you know how many points are typically scrapped in the verification process?
It depends. Most of the time, I think that in Portland, or I know that from anecdotally from B Lab, they're a lot lower in Portland than they are in some other places. And I think it's partly because of and I'm not a psychologist, but I play one on TV, that I think that there's an element of we downplay a lot of what we do well here. I think there's a lot of shyness of people not wanting to really toot their own horn about the sustainability efforts they take, or don't think about sometimes as a progressive, what seems normal here in Portland may not be normal in, say, like Oklahoma. And sometimes they want to be like, well, I don't really do that. I don't do that. I don't really do this. And they're often harder on themselves that when they go through certification, the average company in Portland, when they go through certification, their score actually goes up. They go and audit your things and be like, you're really stiffing yourself on one of these points. That does not mean that companies don't lose points. It just means on average, we actually have a positive number of points that goes up versus negative, but that doesn't mean that can happen where sometimes somebody goes in and be like, I have 120 points. And they're like, you have 40. You really thought is not that common. Just given that most people, the only time they really do that is like, you said you did this and you haven't provided any proof that you do it. So one of the ones that people get often where the most underlying points are is, do you have an employee handbook for your company? It's a really good place to say that you do all the things that you say you do. And it's also provides a skeleton for you to update in the future should you make any additional changes to your company to get additional B impact points. You could make the changes in real time with your employee handbook. And people are like, well, I'm the only employee of the company. It's like, well, are you planning on hiring anyone at any point? Then you already have an employee handbook that's kind of sketched out. And it's just a good roadmap. A lot of the time we created a procurement policy at Be Local PDX, and right, we don't have any employees as a nonprofit. We're an all volunteer organization. And then when it comes time for us to make a decision on how to procure something, we're like, well, we do have a policy. Let's use that. And instantly we've changed a behavior that's like, okay, we're going to be preferential to women and a person of color owned businesses. We said that we were going to do that and that B Corps are going to have an equal shot. And then everybody else comes after. And like, once you put that decision metric in place, that is one of the questions you get asked on your B impact assessment about procurement policies. So, but yes, the average company does go up very slightly here in Portland. That is not the norm nationally.
And another question actually from Adam, I can let people speak if they want, but does B Lab provide any trainings, for example, for Triple Gap Consulting, who does sustainability consulting, and how can they better help serve B Corps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. We definitely want to get connected on that. Then we vet our resources through a couple different lenses. If they're a B Corp themselves or if they're a nonprofit, often are the ones that we'll point people to in particular, just given that meets our procurement policy, like I just talked about. If they aren't one of those things on that side, we still list them as those other pieces over here, but we don't refer to them as directly usually. Help companies get certified as a B Corp, but aren't B Corps themselves, and are like trip a little bit of a question sometimes for folks of like, well, if you're going to help me do this, but you aren't one, why? You don't see the value in doing it for yourself, and yet you're adding value to me to add this value. But we're happy we put people connected to resources all the time. Tremendous. I'm like, well, we really need to get connected to them too, so that we can make sure that we're plugged in on that side. So Adam, if you want to, I'd be happy to connect with you. I'm back to work on Monday. And I'd be happy to start building some of those additional connections, to make sure that we can get people into, because right now there's definitely more interest in becoming a B Corp than there's the resources in truly getting people certified. And it's really important to create that additional bandwidth on this end as well. Just because we don't want anybody to get caught in the churn and missed and then lose that opportunity to welcome them into our community.
Any follow-up, Adam, or that's good? You got a fancy setup going on over there too with the mic and the headphones. Craig, one other question from earlier on. Julie had to jump off, but I want to be able to get her an answer later. Are there any average or estimated costs beyond assessment of being a B Corp, and then also kind of drag both structurally into the process once you do become a B Corp?
Yeah, it's a great question. I hear from folks all the time that they basically amortize their B Corp cost into changes they want to make to their company anyway. And this is really just creating a roadmap for how to make those changes. If you want to make a change to your company, a lot of folks are not going around running profitable companies, be like, I want to offer really terrible benefits. That's usually not a thought process in a lot of the values space. So if you want to say, I want to offer benefits that are distinctly better than some of my competition, the B impact assessment offers kind of a smorgasbord of options to offer benefits that may be more inclusive, more thoughtful, more appealing than the traditional benefit options. So in that way, some people say, I spent a lot of money doing the things that the B impact assessment wanted me to do, but at the end of the day, there are no required costs really of the B Corp assessment, B impact assessment. So like, what investments are you making in your company to make it more efficient and better and effective, versus what are you spending specifically because I just want to be a B Corp and I'm just going to do this because I have to do it to become a B Corp. Usually there's questions on there that should resonate with you enough that you do them because you wish to do them, not because B Lab told you had to if you wanted to become a B Corp, basically outside of becoming a benefit corporation. And you could change your benefit corporation yourself. You could file those org docs with the Secretary of State in Oregon. It's $60 to file an amendment. So that's one cost that could be out of there. But if you pay an attorney to do it for you, money.
Cool, thank you. Let's see. You mentioned, Craig, sorry, I'm trying to interpret this question that came through to me. Craig said he answered some of the employee questions for volunteer committees. Can you do that if you work with contractors or subcontractors and don't have employees?
Yes. There are questions in there. It asks you how many employees you have. And sometimes it say no employees, and it says I also have contractors. Obviously, you don't offer a lot of time benefits to contractors, but they do. There's questions in there that are specific to contractors for 1099 employees versus W-2 employees. And most of the time what they're trying to do is make sure that the company isn't doing it because they're trying to duck providing benefits to someone in a situation. They're doing it to make sure that their policies and ways that they treat their contractors is commensurate to companies treating their employees well. Because if you're not capturing that they could be quite abusive to 1099 employees and the B impact assessment isn't doing its job, they want to make sure that you're treating the people you employ as a W-2 or a contractor with respect and dignity. But functionally, the questions can be tailored to having contractors and employees both. I know a lot of companies have both contractors and employees on their payroll.
Nice. Cool. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts they would like to share? Oh, I see one more that just came in the group chat. After you start the impact assessment, is there a time limit that eventually expires or must be submitted?
No, there isn't a functional time limit. The only thing I would say is that B Lab does change the version of the assessment about every 3 years. So if you start the assessment and you then spend 12 to 18 months working on it and a new version of the assessment rolls out, about 80 to 85% of the assessment is the same version to version. It gets harder. They're always making it a bit tougher. That's the point. We all need to be improving all the time. And a lot of the questions on like diversity, equity, inclusion, for example, from 4 or 5 years ago were basically like, are you a woman or minority owned business? You got the diversity points. Whereas now it's that it was kind of recognition that a woman owned bar 3 studio in Lake Oswego is not the same as somebody who's a systems affected person with past felony record that owns a business. Those aren't the same types of diversity. So I think that when you're going through the assessment, it might change and it might lower your score because it got a bit harder. But no, there is no time limit on becoming B Corp.
Awesome. Well, okay, let's take this last question and then I'll let everyone go back to the main room for our movement break with Foley. But the last question, as a nonprofit professional, what is a relationship to B Corp? Are B Corp expected to fulfill any requirements to nonprofits in terms of partnership or anything?
B Corps there are a lot of B Corps that are also 1% for the planet, for example, that donate a certain percentage of their revenue to nonprofits. There are some questions on there that talk about nonprofits in relationship to the company. Like, do you include, I can tell I froze for a second there. Do you encourage your employees to volunteer? Do you have paid volunteer time that's during work hours to like work specifically with nonprofits? Do you leverage your companies? Do you offer pro bono work to nonprofits on occasion?